Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well out there in Zoom land. If you're joining me live or if you're watching this in recording, I pray all is well. I'm sending off good prayers to everybody on your continued good work. I read the midterms and overall, very well done. Just want to let you know that you should have been able to see your grade already. Let me make a few announcements here before we get going to try to give you an opportunity to know about a few things that are happening on campus. First of all, there is a Know Your Rights, Immigrant Rights Forum tomorrow at 12 noon. It'll be inside of the campus center. It'll be in room 142. So if you want and can join that, feel free to come out. Mecha is sponsoring it. There are people on our campus and maybe in your family that this would benefit. I also want to put up the Pastor Mac food drive. So years ago, there was a gentleman named Pastor Mac, went to Valley College, graduated Valley College, went to Cal State, and came back after he got his degree to help other people. His name was Pastor Joseph Mack. And for years, he provided food at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter for our friends in the community who needed it. So we continue after his passing during COVID. We continue his legacy to try to help. Today and tomorrow are the last 2 days. So today, if you can bring by canned goods, box goods, other kinds of goods, drop them off in the parking lot number 1, right outside of Liberal Arts here off of the Mount Vernon Street. Or if you're up in my neck of the woods, just come up to North Hall, the 3rd floor, and outside of my office, which is room 322, North Hall 322, you can drop it on the table there and I'll get it. So again, that's today from 2 to 4 or tomorrow morning from 7 to 9. And then we already have an organization. We're going to take it over on Friday, drop it off, and hopefully help some people in our neighborhood. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know. Okay. Don't worry about that. So doing that. Always remember that you should have your always let me get my thing. Always remember you should have your when you come on Mondays, you should have your screen hooked up right to the homepage, and on the homepage you see everything you need to do. I know we do this every week, but I just like to go over it. This week in particular, there's a couple different things that we want to make sure that you're doing and keeping track of. We are continuing to read in our book called Occupied America in chapters 13 and 14, but notice the red. We have Youth Identity Power, which is the other book for this class. And we're starting that one in the last 3 weeks here. And let me turn my share off so you can see. It's this white book right here that you should have picked up at the bookstore. If you have the older version of it and it's red, white, and green, that's fine. Doesn't make a difference. You just put a new beginning in it, but that's just the intro. This is the book we're going to start reading. And for this week, you're reading the intro and you're reading chapter 1. And I call this one the YIP, Youth Identity Power, or you'll see it listed sometimes as Munoz. So you're reading introduction and chapter 1 on that. Basically, it's going to be stuff we are covering or have covered already about Mexican-American identity in the community and how all that works, but just making sure that you get that done. That'll help you on your final exam. I would say that about 75% of the final exam will be this book. So make sure that you are emphasizing your reading. Make sure you're taking good notes as you're reading, and make sure that you're listening on the lecture and watching the Zooms, because I'm going to help you understand through the Zoom how this works and how you'd be able to, get those things that you need for your final exam. So again, reading Occupied America, reading Youth Identity Power. This week, you have 2 documentaries to watch, not just one. So make sure that you notice that there are 2. You only have the quiz on 1, but there are 2, because what we're beginning to do is take a turn, as I talked about last time, and I'll talk again in a moment. We're taking a turn from the historical previous to the Chicano movement, and now we are right at the birth of it. And there are 2 really big aspects that are covered in the Chicano PBS series There's actually 4 parts altogether, but 2 that are really important. The first one is the struggle in the fields. That deals with the farm workers, people like Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and what they did for labor, and what they did for immigrant rights, etc. The second one is what's happening in the schools, and that's education. So you got kind of the immigrant parents being forced to work in, if you will, unfair labor conditions, unhealthy, unhuman labor conditions, fighting for their rights. At the same time, they're fighting for their children to have a better existence and hopefully be able to get a better education, go to college, and do something different with their lives. So very important. So what do you need to complete? Well, you need to do your usual writing assignment. There'll be the prompt in there. Follow that. You'd have your obligatory what the fuck statement. Again, same as you've been doing. Just go in there, read it. If you're the first half of the alphabet or the second half, respond accordingly. You'll have your video quiz only on this video, Taking Back to School. However, you will need the other video, so please watch it, because that's going to give you stuff to put into your final exam about what's been happening during the time of the Chicano movement. You have your YIP quiz. So this is the first time you're going to see a YIP quiz. And what's YIP? Youth Identity Power. That's the new book that I just showed you that you're going to start this week. It's going to be the first one on this. Now, this is a different kind of quiz than you've been taking. The past have just been multiple choice. This is actually, you're going to fill in whatever the statement is, which has to have a statement behind that, because a computer is only as good as whoever's programming it exactly. So if you put in to the answer, let's say the answer is Chicano, and you spell Chicano wrong, it's going to mark you wrong. Don't worry about it. If you get it marked back wrong, go back, check, make sure that you know that that's the right answer, because Mr. Gomez goes over every single YIP quiz, every single answer of every single question. So you will see that some of you will get what's called an updated grade. So let's say you had, out of the 50 points or whatever it is, you had 48, and I'll go back and see the 2 that you got wrong. I'll read to make sure that they gave you credit if it was just a misspelling, or maybe you didn't, YMCA, you didn't put the periods in between the Y, the M, the WCA, whatever. So I'll go back, I'll make sure, and I'll give you sometimes even credit on something if it's close, because I know what you meant to say. The computer doesn't. The computer is literal and can only take exactly what you put in there. So please, you'll take it. If you see you got a couple wrong, you get a second chance at all quizzes always. So check to make sure it is the right answer. And if you know it's the right answer, check the spelling, or if there's some kind of a grammatical thing that you had to put in there, a period or apostrophe or whatever. And if it's still, then don't worry about it. I'll go back and I'll correct it, and I'll give you the credit for it. So the YIP quizzes are fill in the blank, and you'll be needing your Youth Identity Power book, and it goes in sequential order, just like the video quiz, just like the exams, okay? Speaking of exams, you'll have your exam number 5 on chapters 13 and 14 on the book Acuna, and same as you've been doing, so shouldn't be any issues. Are there any questions? Anybody have any questions? It's online here with me. Any questions? Okay, then you know what? You can reach me anytime that you would like. We need to move on, though, and get on and talk about where we last left our heroes. So where did we last leave our heroes? We left them at the time of World War II. And just kind of an overview again. I like to do that. And I think people don't understand why I do that, but I think there's a purpose to overviewing each time. Where have you been and where are you now? So 1848, the United States takes half of the country of Mexico. We now have a large population of Latino people in our country we never had before. Never had them before. It's the largest. Doesn't mean we didn't have Latinos, but you've got half of a person's country. That's a huge population. Those people are taken under a new governmental rule. Their discrimination, you know about that. There's violence, you know about that. There's all kinds of laws that are passed to stop them from voting, from running for office, etc. It doesn't get much better. By 1880s, the United States and other Western powers of the world have gone into Mexico and are stripping them of everything they have, which is causing the second large group of Latinos to enter the United States for one of 2 reasons. Either A, they're escaping the Mexican Revolution that's about to happen, where people are going to get murdered and killed, over 1 million Mexican people, or they're following resources that are being stripped from their country and brought here. in order to feed their children and provide a better life for people. When they get here, they come during the assimilation era. We talked about that. And they are being told you should become a true American. And if you want to stay in this country, you should do the things that true Americans do. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that doesn't play very well, not only for Latino Mexicanos, but all immigrants coming during that time from Europe. And of course, we talked about over 95% of them were actually white people came in here, and they were being treated horribly. So it's not a good time for immigrants, period. And they're being used. They're here for industrialization. They're here for the jobs in the factories that have been created, and they don't want them for any other reason except cheap labor, really. Something happens, though, along the way after that era, 1920s, and into the 1930s, we see the Great Depression. And that Great Depression produces, well, as I told you, there's one of two ways that human beings can address what's going to happen in the real world when there's problems. Either we can get together, solve the problems, and figure them out, or every man for themselves. And unfortunately, it appears that a lot of human, I don't want to say human nature, but human decision-making has gone in that other way. That instead of working together through the processes and procedures that are causing the issues, every person hunkers down and takes care of themselves while others suffer. So what happened to Latinos? What happened to Mexicanos during the Great Depression? Well, over 2 million of them were repatriated, kicked out of their own country, because many of them, up to 75% of them, were probably the children of immigrants, if not themselves had been born in the United States. So we're looking at total violation of the Constitution, total disrespect, and many of them are kicked out of the country and never to return. And as we saw in the video, they don't even know where their moms and dads, sisters and brothers are. That's such a sad video. So much sadness to see the people who lost and have no family because of our racist policies in our country known as repatriation. What pulls the United States out of the Great Depression is not anything that the government did or any great miracle. It's actually the war. The war creates a lot of jobs. Those jobs provide for people. The provisions of murdering and killing other human beings made our country very wealthy. And we send off tons of Latinos. Mexican Americans come back highest decorated per capita in the military. They come back after fighting for our country, and they face the same problems that had happened previous to the war. So we talked about that, and that's where we left off. There were two groups of people that I really wanted you to think about: the soldiers' experience and the workers' experience. And why did I want you to remind you of those and to learn about those? Because that's what's going to change. What's going to change? So up until this point where we're taking off today with the new topic, el movimiento, which means just the movement, the Chicano movement, the social, political, economic movement that's going to happen in our community. Up until this point, we've been looking at the historical kind of precedents, if you will, of repression and oppression and discrimination and segregation. But somebody who's willing to die for this country, when they came back, they knew, like I said last time, they knew that they had to organize and they had to stand up and respond to what was happening. They had been raised as Mexican Americans during what we call the assimilation era. So their way of approaching the problem and the issue was not one of massive movements in the streets or, taking over buildings or sit-ins or any of that. They literally thought that they were true Americans and that they could do it through the proper procedures. So the soldiers come back after defending our country, fighting and dying for our country, and they start to organize, and things are going to be in places, we'll see in a moment, that help that. The second group that we talk about, remember, was the laborers, the workers, that during the Great Depression, the majority, if not the overwhelming majority, of jobs went to white males. Remember that, because that sets a precedence in the white males' minds. For 10 or more years, the only people who really get jobs in this country are white males. Then the war starts. They go off to fight as white males in this war as soldiers. And when they come back, they are decorated heroes. They've saved the world. They've stopped Nazism. They've stopped the imperial powers of Japan. They've stopped fascism of Mussolini. They see themselves as outstanding, incredible human beings. And I'm not saying they weren't. But what they find when they come back is that many of the factories, many of their jobs were filled with women, blacks, brown people, Asians, Native Americans, and other types of people that previous were not in those jobs. And having lived and seen a society based upon basically white supremacy during the Great Depression, where they were the only ones who got jobs, not even white females. Remember that. Not even white females. White females were declined jobs during the Great Depression because they were stealing from the bread makers, right? So during this time frame, when they come back and they see black people and brown, they don't even know what to. This is terrible. That's upsetting to them, and they want their jobs back, which now causes attention because you have laborers who were told in this time of the Great Depression that they couldn't do it. They were too stupid, or this isn't for you girls, or whatever. And now they're actually doing it. They're in the factories building airplanes, and they're at the ports like my grandparents and my father and my uncles, and they're supporting the war efforts, or they're in factories creating the tents and the soldiers' guns and the bullets, and they're doing the wires and all the things needed for tanks and all those things. And now the war is over, and we have a new view of what should happen. And the new view is the white people who had been empowered for so long have now returned, and they want their jobs back. And of course, we talked about that friction, and we're going to look at how does that play out even more now. So our class takes a big turn right now. Big turn. We're working our way out of the historical stuff that happened before the movement, and now we're actually into the birthing of the movement, the very beginnings of the Chicano movement. Very important. So today we entitled this, we'll call it Movimiento, and I want to talk about some of the things that were in place that kind of facilitated and, if you will, pushed off the movement. First of all, we need to take an overview of what happened in post-World War II. And what do I mean by post? That means after. Post means after. So 1945, the war comes to an end. And then after that, there are some things in the world that we're going to look at because they facilitate the Chicano movement and the Black Power movement and the American Indian movement and the women's equal rights movement and a lot of movements. People think of these things in vacuums, but it's not vacuums. There's actually a worldwide current that's moving this stuff, if you will, down the pipeline. So what's happening worldwide? Well, this is a huge thing that we don't often talk about. This is called the era of decolonization. This time in world history is called the era of decolonization. And if you remember back to our very beginning of the class, when we talked about colonization, you might remember the definition is the placing of power over a territory outside of your original boundaries. Let me repeat that. What is colonization? The placing of power over a territory outside of your original boundaries. That's why it was called New England. That's why it was called Nueva España, New Spain. That's why it was called Nouveau François, New France. They understood that that was not their territory. They were going into somebody else's territory, taking that control over it, and now saying it's theirs. That's going to cause a problem. If I went to your home tonight, took over your house, you come home, I'm like, hey, look what I found. You're like, no, I live here. You're like, no, I found it. It's now mine. There's going to be a friction, isn't there? What happens at the end of World War II is after millions of people have been murdered and killed for the second time, there's a question, what the fuck just happened? Now, if you know what happened in World War I, which was basically 1900, 1920-ish in that era, if you know what happened there, our president at the time when it was over said this was such a horrendous war that, in fact, this will be the war to end all wars. He went out and pronounced to the whole world that World War I was so terrible that it would never happen again because people had learned just how insanely horrible wars were. And guess what? 20 years later, an even bigger and worse war is World War II. So at the end of these two world wars, the world is kind of reeling from the effects of it. And people are asking, what's causing this? What's causing this? And what was causing was really the efforts of the Western world to go around and take everybody's shit and say it's theirs, AKA colonization. So at the end, people said, well, maybe we shouldn't be taking people's shit and saying it's ours. Maybe we should return what we took and give the power that these people should have back to them. In other words, England and people from England shouldn't be running India. You have no fucking business there. That's not your part of the world. Why are you there? People from France or people from Germany should not be in Africa. And they should not be controlling African people's resources, destination, sovereignty. That's it. Why are you there? And so we begin to see that much of the Western world has a discussion on the possibility of what we call decolonization. Decolonization. If the act of colonization is to place your power over somebody else's territory and say it's yours now, then to decolonize means to return the power back to those original inhabitants. And maybe by doing that, de-escalate some of the problems that we have had. Now, anybody out there, if you're listening to what I'm saying, think now, critical thinking. Why would the era of decolonization, returning power back to the original people who had their land stolen, their resources stolen, and were under the control of somebody else's ideologies and understanding, why would the era of decolonization be important to Chicanos? Let's take a second. Let's think about it. Why would it? Possibly because during the 1840s, the United States of America took half of Mexico and just said, now it's ours. Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, parts of Oklahoma, California, Arizona, Nevada, right? Maybe, just maybe, some of the ideas being put out there about returning power to the original inhabitants is being, if you will, read about and understood by Latinos who have lived in this country since 1848, and now it's what? 1940, basically 8. So for 100 years, had power placed over them, their ideologies, their language, their religion, their culture, their dress, their garb, their food, their understandings, totally disrespected, in many cases outlawed or kept from them. Maybe this is something to think about. And so this is in the community now of the Latino people who are living in the United States, thinking about how is this that you're going around the world, United States, saying we should return India to India peoples. Why are you saying this area of Africa should be returned to African people? This area, this should be returned to whatever people, but yet inside of your own country, you've taken hundreds of Native American nations and half the Mexican nation, and there's no discussion about how that affected these people and what were the consequences. The second worldwide, remember we're talking about the world now, second worldwide concept that's out there and structure that's out there is the Cold War. Now, the Cold War is an ideological war. What do I mean by ideological war? It's a war of ideas. It's not actually a war per se of guns, bullets, missiles, tanks, although there are manifestations of it. The Cold War is an idea war. People always say to me, Mr. Gomez, how could there be a war of ideas? I don't know. You tell me. You tell me why the Shiite Muslims are killing the Sunni Muslims today. You tell me why the Protestant Christian people are killing the Catholic Christian people in Ireland and England for hundreds of years. You tell ideological because you are this and I am that, we have to fight each other. Ideological wars have been a part of the human existence for a long time. And the Cold War was no exception. So what is the Cold War? Well, during World War II, remember we're talking about the era right after World War II, but during World War II, there were 3 allies who entered World War II as allies. They had made a deal at the end of World War I. They said, if anybody steps to one of us, they step to all of us. So we're going to protect each other. That was England, France, and the United States. At the end of World War I, they got together and said, what the fuck just happened? And they said, I don't know, but if that shit happens again, we're going to stand up for each other. So let's sign a pact, P-A-C-T, a pact, P-A-C-T. Let's sign a pact that if you step to one of us, you step to all of us. Okay, they did. They entered World War II as a set of alliance, allies, a set of alliance. They had an alliance there. During the war, however, something else happened. The Germans, who had promised only to stay in Europe, broke that promise with the Russians and attacked Russia. So now Russia will begin to fight against the Nazis also. So now it's the United States, France, and England fighting on the western half of Europe against the Nazis, and it'll be the Russians on the eastern half fighting against the Nazis. When they joined in that fight, they became an ally or a friend. They became kind of a friend of ours. When the war ends, the four friends sit down at a place called Yalta, 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 and they have a conference. And they say, okay, it's been like 10, 15 years since parts of Europe didn't have leaders. Who's going to take control of this area? Poland. Who's going to take control of this area? Who's going to take control? Who's going to? And the Russians say, basically at the table, it's much more, if you will, involved in this. But basically, they say, we don't care what you do with your half of Europe. We'll take care of our half of Europe. And the United States, France, and England are like, wait, what? What do you mean your half of Europe? And they're like, dudes, you had 3 countries on the West fighting against these guys. We were the only ones on the East fighting. We lost 20 million plus people. We were being killed and slaughtered. And we have standing armies in every major place in Eastern Europe. I think it's ours to do what we want to do with. Well, that caused a problem, didn't it? The United States, France, and England are one type of worldview, ideologically, capitalists, and the Russians at that time were a communist perspective of the world. So if you don't know about communism and capitalism is the free market. Everybody who can takes whatever they can, and he who dies with the most toys wins. So, Mr. Bezos, you pay my students shit wages to work in a shit fucking warehouse over here, and they're up all night. They can't do their homework while you drive around in a $500 million yacht. Oh, y'all didn't see that? Look it up. Bezos bought a $500 million boat. It has to take 7 boats around him to keep it moving because it's so big and needs so much fuel and so much resources that he had to have 7 boats ride alongside of his one $500 million, $500 million boat. Meanwhile, the people of Rialto, the students of Colton and San Bernardino, who go to make him those billions and trillions of dollars, are getting paid minimum wages or subhuman wages to work in a overheated or overcold warehouse, breaking their backs, lifting and packing from midnight till 8 in the morning while their children or family are at home trying to rest, and they don't even know, right? Capitalism. You deserved it. You work for it. You get it. Communism. And again, these are ideologies. These aren't always true. Communism, there's a spread of the wealth. If you are a part of a business that creates $1 billion worth of wealth, that wealth needs to be spread. It can't be going to one person and everybody else gets to piddle. It has to be spread. The power. If you're the mayor of the town this month or this year, and somebody else is next year, and so the power rotates. According to communist perspective, it's a closed market, and power and resources are to be kept in, if you will, some form of equal bearing. Well, that's not good news for capitalists. Capitalists believe they should be able to take everything. And if they get it first and they deserve it, that's theirs. So what happens at the end of World War II is the 4 friends now are split. And I always say it's kind of like you and your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your partner. You're walking through the mall. You see a couple that's like 90 years old. They're holding hands and waddling. And you look at your partner, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your wife, whatever. You say, that's going to be us. 50 years from now, we're going to be them. And you're just talking. And then the next day you break up with her. And she takes her cigarette, burns your face out of the prom picture, takes your ring, throws it at you. You take, what she wants to be with that dickie. And right? Yesterday, you guys were in love and everything's going to be beautiful and wonderful. And today there's cold feelings. At the end of World War II, the Allies, because of different ideological perspectives on how the world and time and history would move forward, because they have differences, they split. And the world is taught into 2 different types of people. Those who follow the capitalists in the United States and those who follow the Russian ideology of communism, which will later become known as the Soviet Union when they take their half of Europe. Now, Mr. Gomez, why are you telling this in a Chicano history class? Well, think about that. You got a bunch of people living in a capitalist society where whoever gets everything gets everything. And if you were Chicano, Latino at that time, what were you getting? The shaft. You were getting the shaft. Were you working hard? Fucking A, you were working hard. Some of these people, you remember the videos? Some of these people working 17, 18 hours in mines underground 7 days a week. They were working in factories. They were working in the fields, picking food for you and me at 25 cents or 50 cents for the entire box of tomatoes or whatever they were picking. So capitalism says that's all right. Communism says that's not all right. We should spread it. If you have the field out there and we all pick the tomatoes and the tomatoes go for $4 a pound and there's 100 pounds, right? And we should split that. And then there should be nobody taking everything while the other people don't get at least. Somebody began to say, wait a minute, the capitalist system that we've been working in for over 100 years doesn't seem to be providing for our neighborhood, our people, our community. And maybe another way of looking at the world is it's time to do that. Now, I'm not promoting or not promoting communism. I'm telling you, why would this become historically an important discussion in the Chicano community? And it's because of that. They were in need of realizing what could they do to maybe change. So part of it is that. Nationwide, what's going on after World War II? We have the beginning of the civil rights movement. Our African-American brothers and sisters, rightfully so, stood up and said, wait a minute, I was willing to die for this country. I can't shit on the same toilet as somebody. I can't eat in a restaurant the same time. I can't go to the movie theater. I can't ride in the front of the bus. I can't go to a school. I can't get a job. I can't get a house. I can't vote. What the fuck is going on? One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And they began to challenge it. And when they began to challenge it, they set forth kind of like the mold, if you will, the preconceived ideas now that other people began to say, you're right. You're right that although civil rights, and we're going to talk about that in a second, are supposed to be for all citizens of the United States who were born here, and we're not getting it. So women began to talk about it. American Indians began to talk about it. Chicano Latino began to talk about it. So what happens is a huge civil rights movement occurs. Often we think of it only as for our Black brothers and sisters, but realistically, they were just the ones who started and gave everybody that impetus and that strength and that idea that we need to do this. We need to stand up. And so civil rights are rights that are guaranteed to a citizen by its country. And you have, and I have, as citizens of this country, we have civil rights. They're in the Constitution. They're in the laws that we have that are held. And at this point, back in 1940s, right after World War II, most Black people did not have civil rights the same as white Americans. Most poor white Americans didn't have the same as rich white Americans, and so on and so forth. So the civil rights movement is being spurred by our good friends in the South and throughout our country from the African-American community, with people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., some of you may know him, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of college students down in the South, of all these groups that began to fight and say, we need to do something. And if you read the book, and I'm sure you will, if you read the book, Youth Identity Power, the author, Carlos Munoz, is going to say that many Latinos began to work with African-American people in the African-American civil rights movements, learned those techniques, and came and then began to create them in our community. So there's always been a parallel, if you will, and should always be a parallel between us and our brothers and sisters of the African-American community who have suffered numerous violations of civil rights similar to ours. And that's why it's so baffling for me as an older person, maybe not for you as a younger person, to see the disunity in our communities, that at the high schools and in the communities, it's brown people killing Black people, Black people killing brown people, supposedly fighting for resources and stuff, when in reality, it's a game. They played us. And if you don't think it's a game, then you just need to look up Governor Littleton of South Carolina in 1680, when he said, it has always been the function of this government to create this unity between the Black and brown, so they kill each other, lest by their numbers they would find that we are the ones who are the problem. So white rulers have long known to keep Black and brown people fighting is a benefit to them. Civil rights movement is happening nationwide, all different types of people. Red Scare goes back into that Cold War. There was an idea that the communists were going to take over our country. and they were going to steal your rights to go to church, to have a good business, to have a house. They were going to do all this stuff. So red stands for communism. Red Scare was this frightful thing that happened. And there was a guy named McCarthy who was running for Senate, I believe in Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. And he told people that he had a list of all the people in our government who were communist. And when he said that, people went crazy. Now, he didn't really have a list. He was using it as a way to get reelected. He wanted the notoriety. He wanted to be on the whatever. He wanted to be on the news. He wanted to be on the front page. And so he says that he has this list. Well, people start calling him on it. And guess what? Does he really have a list? No. So is he going to look bad? Well, he could, or he could do what? Make up a list. So some of the Republicans at that time decide it's a good idea to create a list of people that they don't like union leaders, liberal people in Hollywood, professors that talk about liberal issues. And they put them on the they call it blacklisting them. Many of them were kicked out of the country, exile. Some of them were put in jail. Many of them lost their families, lost their wives, lost everything. And think about that. If somebody came to you today and said, your father or your mother is a member of terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda or whatever, right? That would cause a break in your family. That would be serious, wouldn't it? Well, what happens is they do this. Now, why are all four of these things super important to the Chicano movement? Because they're the background. They're the background to what's about ready to happen. Returning power to original inhabitants of a land is probably a right and a righteous thing to do. This division that was occurring within the world that said everybody has either this side or that side was causing great trauma inside of our own country. People were struggling just to be able to get jobs and go to a school where they wanted to go to school and study and go to a restaurant. And the idea that the communists were everywhere, all four of those begin to set the background for the Mexican American generation, because they are in this, if you will, arena now. Are they communists because they want to be a part of America, because they want to unionize, because they're asking for equal schools? Well, I don't think they are. But what if you're in power and you spin the narrative that these are communist, crazy people? Ed Gomez is in his class, screaming and yelling and telling the Mexicans to get riled up, and we've got to take care of him. Well, the way you took care of him back in the day is basically you just said, he's probably a communist. You start some sort of inquiry into him, and everybody in the world now sees it on the news that Ed Gomez is possibly a communist sympathizer, undermining the American government. And they're trying to talk about giving power back to these people and those people. That's communist. Right? Everything began to have this background of, you better be very careful of how you approach what you're going to do and ask of your country. Now, that is important because the Mexican American generation, and we talked about this already, everybody remember that during the assimilation era, people came from Italy, came from Poland, Czechoslovakia, whatever, came from all over the world, but they were supposed to become true Americans, assimilate, to become like the greater body. They were supposed to become true Americans. When the parents, like my parents, when they came to this country, they were told that they were pieces of shit because they spoke broken English and they didn't know this. They didn't, what are you, so stupid? Right? They wanted to protect their children from ever being treated like that. So they taught their children from 1920s on, the best thing to do is be a true American, be a true American, be a true American, speak English, dress properly, celebrate these, right? And so this Mexican American generation that was born out of that immigrant movement, out of the so-called Mexican Revolution, right? We talked about those immigrants who came here. They're the first generation. They were taught to become Mexican descendants in America, aka Italian Americans, aka German Americans, aka Mexican Americans. This generation did everything they could, including going to war. They were willing to die for this country. They wouldn't let them shit on the toilet, wouldn't let them get on the bus in the front. They all this stuff that they faced, they came home and said, we're done with that. We're done with that. We were willing to die for this country. We deserve equal treatment as any other citizen. So they're going to respond to racism. They're going to respond to the segregation. They're going to respond to all those things. But they're not going to do it in a radical way. They're going to do it through the system because they believe in the system, because they were willing to die for the system, because they were raised that that's what you do. As true Americans, that's what you do. So they're going to take different ways of approaching it. And we're going to find out that some of those ways did not produce anything more than what their moms and dads basically had gone through, despite the fact that they were Americans and were trying to do it through the system. First, we want to look at the GI Bill. For those of you who don't know what the GI Bill, that is that after the war, money was given to soldiers who had been off fighting. Now, why is that? And I try to explain this to my students. It's really hard for them. So let me give you just kind of a nutshell. And this is going to be scary. So if you're listening to this and you don't like kind of frightful, scary things, you might not want to hear this. Cover your ears. And, I don't know how else you're going to learn it, but figure it out. So they're very scary. Are you ready? Back in the old days, when a person turned 18, they got a job. They bought a house. They got married. They had children. It was expected of them. That's just the norm back in the day. I know. I got students in my class who are like 28, 29 years old and like, hey, Mr. Gomez, I'm a gamer. What? I'm a gamer, man. I play video games. What the fuck are you talking about? You play video games? Yeah, I'm a gamer. That's what I do. People from my generation and my parents and my grandparents, they don't know nothing about being a fucking gamer. You're 18, get a job, get a house, get married, have children. Is that right? I'm not telling you wrong. I'm just saying that was our view. I like my other students. I like, dude, I'm a skater. I'm a skateboarder. I do tricks. You do what? I do tricks, man. I can like do a 360 in the air. You're a skateboarder? You're 27 years old? What the fuck? What? What are you talking about? That wasn't a part of this people's world. So here's why they did this. Their sons, their godsons, their grandsons, their nephews, because it was mostly all male at that time, at 17, 18, were kicked out of school, basically, and sent to fight in Asia, sent to fight in Africa, sent to fight in Europe, in the three arenas, right? When they came back 6, 7, 8 years later, some of them were 26, 27 years old. They had no education. They hadn't had a chance to buy a house. They didn't have no babies yet. That's why, aka the baby boomers, boom, right? They got busy on that shit right away, right? Everything that their world had set for them was not. So somebody said, we got to help these guys. These guys were willing to die for our country, to support justice and equality around the world. And they come back. We need to get them an education and some housing so that they can do right. So we do right by them. So the GI Bill was opened to support soldiers who are now veterans, who had come back, who are years behind. Remember, my dad was 18 when he had me. My mom was 19. My dad had already been working in the steel mills for 2 years when he was 18. 17 and 18, he was there working with his dad. Mexican people were in the steel mills south side of Chicago. They bought a house when my dad was 19. 2 new cars, well, not new cars, but 2 cars. They had payments. That was just normal. I know it's not for us, and I'm not saying it should be or it shouldn't be. I'm merely saying we've got to put ourselves into the mindsets of what was happening historically at that time. The government was run by rich white men whose sons, godsons, nephews, grandsons, whatever, missed out. They missed out on going to college. They missed out on being 18 years old and getting a house and getting a wife and they missed out. They were going to do something for them. Now, what they didn't recognize, or didn't think or maybe didn't plan for. Some of the GIs, some of the veterans were not white. Some of them were black. Some of them were brown. Some were Native American. And the law didn't say you had to be a white soldier, it just said you had to be a soldier. So for the first time, this is huge. This is huge, guys. For the first time, people who saw themselves as true Americans, who had immigrant moms and dads, right? Whose immigrants, moms and dads had worked 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, right? Just work, but could never get out of the hood, could never pay for a college education, could never have a house in a semi-decent neighborhood. For the first time, there's money. You don't think that they wanted to go to college before this? Let me tell you a true story. Ed Gomez, my entire fucking life. My entire life, my parents told me, go to school, get an education, go to college, get an education, go. And I did my best. And I graduated high school with like a 3.98 or some shit like that. And I said, time to go to college. And my dad and mom looked at me and said, what college you fucking talking about? I said, college. They're like, we don't have no money. I'm like, what do you mean? I thought you're going to have to find money. And I didn't want to go. It's not that they didn't want me to go. It was either go to college or nobody in the family eats anything ever. And maybe we could afford the parking pass and the books. You think they wanted to live in the barrios? You think they wanted to live in the countryside in their cars and in tents and in crappy little cabins? They would have much rather lived in decent middle-class neighborhoods. But what's the down payment on a home? More than my father made in his entire fucking year. When I left home in 1984, my father made $16,000, $1.75 an hour or $2.25 an hour, whatever it was. And we had a family of 5 and a house payment, a car payment. We barely ate. This is real, isn't it? So when somebody says, if you were a soldier, you can apply and we'll give you money to help you buy a house. If you were a soldier and now you're a veteran, we will give you money to start your education. June, they were on it. They were on it. But there are experiences that are going to happen in those two areas. When they got money to go to college, and I want you to think about this, for the first time, we are going into classrooms that are run by white males, in schools that are run by rich white males, sitting in a room full of the children who are all rich white males. What do you think their experience was? What do you think their experience was when they got to their university and they were the only brown person in the whole fucking university? I can tell you what it was, because that was me, when there was very few brown people around, if any, and almost less black brothers and sisters. What do you think their experience was? Think about what are they going to have to do to survive? Think about that for a moment, because that's what happened. They get into a classroom. They see themselves as true Americans. They fought and killed for this country. They sit down, and the first lecture is about how the Mexicans don't do shit, that they're lazy, that they're stealing stuff from the American, that they're having sex at 12 and having children. Most of them are alcohol. And you're thinking to yourself, that's not what happens in my family. Are you going to be able to respond to that racism in the 1940s and 50s as a student in a university and college system? And think about what happens if you do. What happens if you say something to the fact that you want to stand up and say what you know to be real, and that you're going to really challenge this. You could not only are you challenging the teacher who's going to give you the grade, you're challenging the system that's going to keep you in there and provide for you. And the people in the classroom are probably listening too. Tommy, Bobby, Billy, and Mikey. And by the way, Billy's dad is the guy who you're going to have to fucking try to get a job from in a couple of years when you get your degree. And Billy goes home and he says, hey, Dad, where do you hear this shit? And he says, what's up, son? He said, we got this Mexican guy in the classroom. His name is Gomez. He's just always screaming about, no, man, there's racism. These people are, and I don't even know what and the dad is like, wait a minute, stop. What? There's Mexicans in? Oh, hell no. I'm calling President Johnson. President Johnson of the college. Can I have the president's office of the college, please? Yes. President Johnson, this is Bill Jones. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, yes. I'm the guy who gives all that money to the University Foundation. I heard something, I'm sure it's just a rumor. My son says there's black and brown people being admitted to the University of blank and blank. No, I do not pay that kind of money for my children to be sitting in the classroom and people are saying that we're bad and I'm not going to have it, Bob. I'm not. I'm not. I'm moving my son out of the college. You got to imagine. You don't think that they faced situations even though they saw themselves as true Americans? What are their choices? Well, their choices are to stay quiet and swallow everything that's given them, that shit sandwich, all the racist, and then go golfing with Billy and tell Billy, even though his dad is the one who fucked your grandpa and your dad over, putting them in some kind of foundry where they're breathing in poisonous shit. There's no protect, even though you know that. What do you do? What do you do? Housing. Think about it. You're going to leave the barrios. You're going to leave the campo, and you're going to move to, even if it's a lower middle class area, which is what my family did back in the 1970s. First of all, some places you couldn't even live. I'm 3 years old or 4 years old, probably 4. Back in those days, we didn't have seatbelts, or if we did, we didn't use them. So I remember I was running the back seat of the car. My mom and dad stop at a house. Remember, I'm only 3 or 4. I don't really know what's going on. Grab my mom's hand. We walk up to the door. A few minutes later, we walk back to the car. We start to drive away. And my mom starts to cry and scream out loud. You know what that was about. And my dad just keeping his head straight. He's not looking at her. And we're driving. But I can feel the tension even as a 3 and 4-year-old. And she says, it's because we're fucking Mexicans. God damn it, they're not allowed to sell us to us. Well, we went up to the house. There was a covenant agreement. Look them up if you think I'm making this shit up. There was a covenant agreement. Look it up if you think I'm making this shit up. A covenant agreement. White people would sign when they'd buy a house that you will not sell. And I'm sorry I'm using the terms. You will not sell the fags, niggers, bitch. They put all that stuff in there. Literally, it's in there. I have a next door neighbor in Redlands who bought a house in Arrowhead, worked for this college, brought me his original deed, the original deed for that house. And the original deed, it said, you will not sell. And it listed all those types of people. Those are called covenant agreements. And they were basically utilized everywhere in the United States, that you wouldn't sell to anybody but white people. So we walked away. So when you can't buy in a decent neighborhood, where do you end up living? Let me repeat that question. When you can't buy and live in a decent neighborhood because there are laws that forbid you, such as what we call sundowner laws. Everybody knows about sundowner laws, right? Some towns you're not even allowed to be in them after sundown, let alone live in them. They have the right to murder you. Literally, they have the right to murder you. Look it up, called sundowner towns. In the United States of America in the 1970s, there was 376 still in existence. That they right accordingly, they have the right to kill black, brown people, Asian people, if you were in their neighborhood after sundown. So now you walk into a neighborhood, you try to buy a house, and we did. Eventually, my father was able to find a place where they accepted us, quote unquote. What did acceptance mean? That for 1 year, Mr. Peach, because that was his name on one side, and Fran and Wally on the other, never came out to say hi to us or anything. They literally stood behind, and I'm not making this shit up, these are behind their curtains, and this is what they would do. We would see them. Finally, about a year, this is all true stuff. Finally, about a year into our living there, Fran and Wally came out and they introduced themselves. And Wally said to my dad, and I'm not making this shit up, we're glad to finally meet you. When you moved in, we thought you were one of those dirty Mexicans and that you were going to just have your children running around filthy and you were going to park cars in the front yard and you weren't going to take care of your property. But we now see that you take care of your property and your children are always clean and you don't park your car. So we want to introduce a year, because in their heads, Mexicans are dirty, filthy, ignorant people. This is real stuff. You know it, I know it. People have these thoughts in their head. This is real. So, as we go, the GI Bill, right, is passed. Housing and education is opened to poor Latinos. And for the first time, they're allowed to go in there. They're allowed to go in. They start to move into decent neighborhoods, and they start to go to colleges. It's going to be a long road for them, isn't it? But it's going to start to happen. They also join what are called Viva Kennedy clubs. Viva Kennedy clubs. So Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, was running for president, and the Latinos actually liked him for two reasons. Number one, he was an immigrant background. His father and family had been immigrants from Ireland. And number two, he was Catholic, Roman Catholic. He was the first president in the entire history of the United States ever not to be a Protestant. He was a Catholic. And so they liked him. They tried to help him. They created clubs. They went through our communities. They set up all of our stuff, right? So that people could, if you will, learn how to register to vote, go out and do things, right? When he got shot, because, he got killed, then the next guy, Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, they created clubs for him. Now, if you read, and you will in the book, what was the purpose behind it? Well, the purpose was they were trying to set up the idea that people make it, if you will, to a place politically with the help of all the people in their community, not just white. So, like Black people, they had gone out. They did what were called registration drives. They got them to register. They said, "I'll help you." They got elected. They didn't help. They went out. They registered Latinos. They got them elected. They didn't help. Basically, they were just using them. So, as we look through this, we've got some serious shit happening. They are now in colleges. They're trying to vote. They're buying homes. And they begin to realize that people see them basically as pieces of shit. And if they're going to deal with that, there has to be some sort of, if you will, one way or the other, explanation of why who they are. So Mexican Americans are in class with other people. People think they're pieces of trash. They take their degree and they say, listen, we're going to have to start teaching people we're the same as they are. We're exactly the same as they are. That just like them, their parents came from Ireland or Germany or whatever, just like them, whatever. And the Mexican American Study Program is created. What is the Mexican American Studies Program? Just what you would think it is. It's not to show that they are different. It's to prove that they were the same. They were true Americans. Now, I want to ask some questions here, and I want you to think about this. If it's 1950s and you're a Chicano Latino person and you want to show white people that you're exactly the same as them, let's take kind of a survey. Are Mexican American people able to buy homes and live in any neighborhood as nice as they would like, just like white people? The answer is no. Are Mexican American people allowed to go to colleges and universities and take any classes and become doctors and lawyers? The answer is no. Are Mexican American people able to go into any job that they want and apply, and people just say, oh, come on in, we'll hire you? The answer is no. Are Mexican American people able to go into courtrooms and the judge and the jury and the police treat them the same as they do white people? The answer is no. Are Mexican American people able to whatever, go to restaurants, buses, public places, theaters? And the answer is no. If the answer is no to all of those, are we really considered true Americans? Let me repeat that. The Mexican Americans, for the first time now, are in colleges and universities. Not many of them, but some. They realize that people see them as pieces of shit, and they know it's not true. So they set up a program, literally, to teach people who are Mexican Americans. They're just like everybody else. But when they start doing their research, when they start looking and doing their research, they're not. Legally, in the court system, school system, employment system, public works, legally, and everywhere you look, Mexican Americans are not being treated the same as other true Americans. So they have two things they can do. One, they can accept that and say it doesn't matter, I still going to believe I'm a true American and lie to themselves. Or number two, they could say, well, if we're not being treated as true Americans, and that's not what's happening to us, is what's happening to other people, then we probably shouldn't even try to be true Americans anymore. It doesn't seem that they really care for us to be true Americans. It doesn't seem they really want us to be true Americans. So this new group of people who are now beginning to study this are the soldiers and the people who were come back from the war, who were the children of immigrants. We call them the first generation. They called themselves, or they were called, I shouldn't say they called themselves, they were called at that time Mexican American generation. Those people are going to have babies, and those babies are going to be called the second generation. And they're going to watch their moms and dads go to court, be treated like shit. They're going to watch their moms and dads go to real estate, try to buy a house like I watched, treated like shit. They're going to watch the police treat them like shit, the judges treat them like shit, the business owners, the building owners, the real everywhere. And some of them are going to say, fuck it, I don't even want to try to be a true American. My dad went and fought and tried to do everything right, and they still don't treat him right. Maybe we should create a new identity for ourselves, something different, something that we believe might be better for us. They began to look back at their historical understandings, who they were, and they came to a conclusion that maybe they were somebody than what our society was telling them. Any questions on that first part of our lecture for today? Any questions on that? Okay.
No, but it was really good.
Thank you, sister. Let's go to the second part. And the second part is they began to realize that maybe somehow things had not been taught to them the right way, and that they had to look deeper. So as they began to create a new identity for themselves, remember, Mexican American, that identity was given to them by the so-called nativists who hated immigrants, and they wanted just everybody to become a true American like them. And if you didn't like it, then get the fuck out of my country. So the Chicanos said, okay, people think we're pieces of shit. Why? Let's go back. They started going back. They went back 50 years to the 1900s. Nope, Mexicans were still seen as pieces of shit. Okay. They went back 50 more years to 1850, right when we became part of the United States, the Southwest, when we took half of Mexico. Nope, still pieces of shit. Okay, well, let's go back into Mexico's history then. They went back, went back, went back, went back. Finally, they got to the point where at the very beginning of white Europeans under Spanish rule, Hernan Cortez, when he came and he saw the Indian people who lived here as enemies, as savages, as infidels, as stupid, ignorant people. That's where the idea that Mexican people, Salvadorian people, Guatemalan people, Honduran people, that's where that began, that we were the stupid idiots. It starts there. Previous to white people coming here, no American Indian people looked at each other and said, you're an idiot. What? Yeah. Aren't you an Indian? Yeah. You're an idiot. No, wait a minute. Aren't you an idiot? Yeah. Well, then how come you're saying I'm an idiot because I'm an Indian? I don't know. I just think Indians are idiots. But you're an Indian. Nothing happened like that. Indian people didn't point at Indian people and say, you're an idiot. White people came from Europe with white supremacist ideologies, that their world was the best and they were the best, and their religion was the best, their food was the best, their music was the best, their culture, their hair, the way they dressed, everything was the best about them. And everybody else was basically monkey, savage, dumbass people. They're the ones who brought that. When they brought that, the historical perspective of our people began to be distorted. We lost our languages. I know it's hard for people to remember. Spanish is not our language. Spanish comes from Spain. Spain is Europe. Europeans are the colonizers. We had our own languages here. Millions and millions of people spoke our languages. We had our history before it was erased. Why am I saying it was erased? Because you don't know this shit. The majority of you taking this class don't know this shit. Neither did I. Where was it my entire life? It was buried. It was pushed to the side. It was as if it was insignificant. We don't know our own history. It has been destroyed and buried. What was the first thing Hernan Cortez did in the first videos that you watched? 500 nations. He burnt everything to the ground. He destroyed all of Tenochtitlan, all of it. He killed all the birds. He killed all the buildings. He burnt down all the books. He did everything, threw everything away. Destroyed everything they could. To take a person's history is to take who they are. And once you have taken away who they are, you can control them. When people try to fuck with me, and I'm being serious now, when I go to immigration checkpoints or when I'm at wherever and there's immigrant and they start telling me, where are you from? What do you mean, where am I from, motherfucker? I'm from right here. Where are you from? You look like you're an immigrant. Where are you from? Poland? Germany? My people's bones are right in this land right here. If you dig up the ground in this area, Southern California, Arizona, Sonora, Chihuahua, if you dig up this area, my people have been buried here for 60,000 years. If I dig up this shit, your people have not even been here 200. Don't fucking come and tell me history. I know my history, but it's been buried, hasn't it? So that we don't know, so that we feel when they tell us the so-called story that they know, then that must be the story. We're ignorant. We're stupid. They brought religion. They brought money. They brought the right stuff, the good medicine. They brought everything. And we should be happy that they stole everything from us and that we get to live here now as servants. That's not how it fucking works. Real history is real history. This was our place. You came, you stole it. You murdered and killed. You created genocide against the American Indian people. You continue to destroy and kill American Indian people. You call them Mexicans, but they're still Indians. You call them El Salvadorians, but they're still native people. You kill them by the hundreds, thousands, United States of America. Don't lie. You'd like to murder all of them if you could. That's real. Let's look at the real history of what really happened, not some watered down, whitewashed shit that you want to present to me. When they looked back, they began to realize they had lost their languages. They had lost their history. And they were losing their culture, if not completely lost, almost entirely. It's all around us. How do I know that? Because my students now have the same worldview as those who were the conquerors and killers. So they watched people murder and kill. Let me repeat this. You went into a community. In that community, some people were murderers and killers, robbers and stealers. And because they got everything they wanted, you became them. It's true. Our societies throughout North America, Central America, and South America, women were equal to men. Women were respected. Women are the givers of life. Women are the keepers of all knowledge. But my people now have seen women in a way that I never could imagine. Young people walking around calling women bitches, women calling themselves bitches. The term bitch means a female dog that needs to be fucked. Are you a female dog that needs to be fucked? Or are you the keepers of wisdom? Are you the givers of life? Are you the protectors of society in that way? You have swallowed the poison. You have become them. Children are in the way. I can't have me time. I want to go out with the boys. I want to go with the girls. I want to go drink. And I want to, I got these kids and they're bothering me. That's not our view. Our view is every day is a good day to die for the children. That is a Native American saying. Go back and look it up. Every day is a good day to die for the children. Now they're a problem. They're in the way. So men just leave their wives who have nothing and watch their own blood, their own children, fucking die in the street. They don't give a fuck as long as they can party, drink, buy cars, go out fucking football games. They don't give a fuck if their wives and their children or their mothers of the children are dying. They don't give a fuck. Why should they? Every day is a good day to die for the children. We are supposed to live that way. Our culture is going away. The earth is to be protected. It gives us life. It's what provides us the food. We're ripping it up. I don't care. I'm looking for gold. I'm going to rip up every river, every mountain. Gold diggers, Alaska. Gold diggers, gold dig, gold. Every show is about getting gold, gold, gold. Getting money, 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 money. Getting power, power. Getting big cars, getting big airplanes, getting big minks, getting I need everything. I need it all. I got a jet plane. I want to be a billionaire. It's a world perspective. It's a way to live. I'm not telling you you're wrong. So you can live however the fuck you want. You do any things I just talked about, you can do anything against. That's not my business. My business, I'm a teacher. I'm trying to teach you that there are different ways of looking at this world. And the one that currently most of you, if not all of you, are swallowing was not your way. That was somebody else's. You lost your languages. You lost your history, you lost your culture, and you lost your world perspective. And now you do exactly what they tell you. Go out and work, make money, work, money, me, work, money, me, work, money, me, work, money, me. That's the most important thing. The people who are the second generation, the grandchildren of the immigrants, many of them bought that, but some didn't. Some said, something wrong here. Something's not right with this. This is not how we should live. Our history, our people that we are leaving behind, there's some truths back there. We should stop and go back and pick them up, those truths, pick up those lessons. Maybe they mean something and we forgot. They began to look back at what people called us. They tried to find a name that kind of unified us. And they did, in the end, find in many letters, in many writings by the rich, in many things that the rich landowning people saw most of us as. They saw us as poor, working indigenous people. And they thought that was stupid of us. That why are you so stupid? And so they put a derogatory, everybody knows what the word derogatory means. That means kind of like a bad term. They used the word Chicano as a bad term. It was a derogatory term, a pejorative term, kind of like nigger or spick or bitch or fag. And I'm just using those as a lesson of how they use pejorative negative terms, right? These are my brothers and sisters on this earth. I don't use those terms, but some people do. And Chicano was put in there as one of those terms, as a negative, pejorative, derogatory term. But the Chicanos said, wait a minute, maybe we should take that term and we should build on it, because maybe we are these things. But just because we are these things doesn't mean that we're bad. For instance, being poor. Who said that being poor is a bad thing? Who said that? Well, probably the rich, so that they can feel that they're better than you and I. If you think about it, if you're a Christian person, and if you're not, just know the story of Jesus. Jesus didn't barely have shoes on his feet. He barely had a potato sack as a piece of clothing. Burlap, right? What they make potato sacks out of. He was a poor person and came to this earth in that way, to be humble. But being poor in our world is almost like you did something wrong, like there's something bad. When I was a younger man, I often like to argue with as many people as possible. I know it's probably hard to believe, but it's true. And I had a very important turning point in my life. I've learned lessons at different points that have changed my life trajectory. And I remember this one discussion that I was having at a party in Hollywood, probably was February or March because it was cold outside. We were all inside, and I was arguing with people at the party. I think there was about 5 of them arguing against me, that poor people are just stupid people, that they fucked up and it's their own fault and they got what they deserved. And people were saying, how do you say it? And I was like, because I'm going to college. I'm putting the time in. I'm going to get money and I'm going to be rich and I'm going to do good things. That's just how it is. And I remember we were going back and forth, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, I don't know how it appeared or how it happened, but I had a vision. I'm not making this up. This is a true story. My grandmother's face appeared right in front of me. Now, if you don't know, I may have said before, but I'll talk about it in the class sometime. My grandmother was my hero, the only person in this world who I believe truly loved me and cared for me. Nobody else. My mother, father didn't care. My family, I didn't have any. It was just my grandmother. So she's sacred to me. She appeared in front of me, and I could see her face was concerned. And I was so shocked by the vision. I got up and I walked out and I went outside alongside the house. And I remember standing there and breathing, and the smoke was coming out of my breath, because it was so cold outside. I thought to myself that night, my grandmother's very poor, probably the poorest person I knew. She worked scrubbing floors till she was 78 years old and couldn't do it no more because she couldn't walk. Her entire hip was gone. She was dragging her leg, and still she was so poor, but she was always kind. If poor people were pieces of shit, then my grandmother was the biggest piece of shit. That couldn't be. I adored her. Somehow I bought this idea that poor people, by the virtue of being poor, were useless. But I knew that she had worked hard every day of her life, sometimes 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, just to try to eat, just to provide. Something was wrong there. They tried to tell us that working class people, something was wrong with that. My father was a machinist when I was growing up. He had lost his jobs in the steel mill because the steel companies had gone under, and he had to find a job anywhere he could. So he put machines together at a printing press where they printed books. And because he worked on machines, his hands would get dirty. And if you have any friends or family who work on cars or something, you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to get that out of the cracks of your fingers under your because every day it's going under there. Even if you use soap. My brother builds NHRA race cars, and even him and his fingers, as much as he has all the soaps he needs, and he's not poor, he has a decent job. It's his hands still have like grease in the cracks and stuff that just won't come out. It's probably not going to come out maybe for a long time. And I'm telling you that because for my third grade class, I had a teacher named Mrs. Morgan, and I loved Mrs. Morgan. Matter of fact, I was in love with her, I think, as a child because I was told what beauty was by the media. Anything tall, thin, and blonde with blue eyes was beautiful. And so that's all we saw on television. So and everything that was around me otherwise was whatever. And she was tall, blonde, blue eyed. And I remember anything she told me I would do for her. Oh gosh, Mrs. Morgan, anything she told me. And then the day came when it was time to do parent teacher conferences. Back in those days, they did it at nighttime because people work. You can't do it in the middle of the fucking day. I don't know if they're thinking about it these days, but anyway. So my dad got off of work, came home, picked me up. We went there. And I remember we sat down and she was at the desk getting something. My dad was sitting there with his hands on the table like that. And she came and she looked at his hands and she pushed her chair back like this, like, ew, he's filthy. And I remember as a 7-year-old child looking at my dad, looking at his hands, seeing that they were dirty, looking up at Miss Morgan and knowing that she was disgusted. And I remember saying to myself, I will never be like him. That's sick, dirty. I'll never be like that. I was 7 years old. I was a child. I was malleable. In other words, influenced. Now I'm an old man. Now I know that it was those dirty, broken hands that fed me, that worked 70 hours a week, that housed me, clothed me, protected me. And I asked for forgiveness. I didn't know any better. I was a child. And I just thought, What's wrong with him? They teach us to hate ourselves, and they do a good job. Often we swallow whole the ignorance, racist, sexism, classist shit that they teach us. And it affects us in the long run in a very, very powerful way. They want us to hate ourselves because we work with our hands, because we do the jobs that nobody else will do. I never, ever, 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 ever think of that in that way again. I've painted houses, I've cleaned toilets, I've picked up vomit, I've done everything because I know that I'm no better than anybody else on this earth. And those people who do that job deserve the same human respect and self-esteem as any other person, whether I'm a fucking professor or whatever. Some of my colleagues in this building think their shit don't stink because they read a few books. I don't know what fucking world they live in. Some of them are stupid fucking people, and I'll tell them to their faces. We must remember that we're all here together. We all have a role. The Chicanos understood that, and they began to say, all right, poor people, working people, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. They also knew that we were indigenous people. What do I mean by indigenous? That we were the Indian people, that we were the brown people, that we were the people connected to the earth, whether we were Maya, whether we were Aztec, Toltec, Mixtec, whether we were Tarahumara, Yaqui, whether we were whatever, Mosquito people, from wherever we came. We were indigenous people. And there was nothing wrong with that. I know that a lot of Mexicano, Latino people talk about tonto indio. I've heard it. It hurts me to hear it. I know that a lot of them talk about how the Indian people are so stupid. It hurts me to hear it. Most of them have the nopal right here. They have it coming right out. But they've rejected their own understandings of who they are. And one of the most central things that you can have as a indigenous Native American Indian person, whether you're from the indigenous peoples of Arizona, Wisconsin, New York, California, El Salvador, Nicaragua, we're all related. We're all indigenous peoples originally. We were all community centered. We were all community centered, which meant that we understood no individual is better than the community. The community is the first thing, that we do things for our community. That's not what we're taught in the Western world. That's not why you're in college. You didn't come to college so you could be a community and make sure that everybody lives the same as you. You came to college because it's dog eat dog, bitch. You're going to have the better degree and get the better house and the better health care and the better vacation and the better everything, retirement, everything. And what will happen to the people in Bloomington and Colton that you grew up with? That doesn't matter. That's their business. I'm an individual, forward movement, progress. You're not a cyclical person on the community circle? No. That's for stupid people. You have swallowed the Western understanding of the world where women are left behind, Black people are left behind, immigrants are left behind, poor whites are left behind. You've swallowed that? It's your world, buddy. I don't tell you what to do. Do whatever the fuck you want. I respect men and women have the right to choose and be who they want to be. My job's not to tell you who to be. My job is to tell you what happened during the Chicano movement. What did people begin to question? How did they begin to look at stuff and understand stuff? They knew that their moms and dads had been created as Mexican Americans, but they had not got the respect that they were supposed to get. They knew that over time, the language of our Indian people, our history, our culture, our world perspectives were gone, that they looked down upon us because we were poor, working, indigenous, community-centered people. Isn't it true? How many of us that I've talked to my students, how many of us that I've talked to my community where you're living in a home and then your uncle comes up and he stays with you and your aunt and your grandma, your people, because we're community centered, because we're indigenous people, because we recognize the link that we have to all living things, all things on this earth, period. But we're losing it. We're losing that quick. We're becoming more and more westernized. or become more every man for themselves, and fuck it. If I could use your color against you and get more money than you, then I will. If I can use your gender against you and get more money, then I will. If I can use whatever I can use against you that gets me further down in front of that line, that linear understanding of the earth, then so be it. Mexican Americans had followed that rule, but their children were beginning to reject it. Some of them said we need to push for a Chicano understanding in our community. The term that they used to call us Chicano, they thought it was supposed to be something bad. As a matter of fact, on page 96, let me read to you. In the middle of the page, the citation. Chicano in the past, a pejorative, which means the negative term, right? A class-bound adjective, poor, working class, a class-bound, has become now the root of our new cultural identity for our people. It reveals a growing solidarity, a growing pride, and a growing confidence in who we are. They took that term that was supposed to mean something bad and said, no, we are poor. We are working. We are Indian people, but we're okay. We're proud. My grandmother was a good person. My grandfather was a good person. These are good people. It didn't matter that they had no money. It didn't matter that they worked with their hands. It didn't matter that they were brown people. As a matter of fact, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. And I will stand with my community in teaching my children and our grandchildren to stand proud as brown, working, poor people. And remember, we are community centered. That I will be there for you and you will be there for me, and we will take care of our community, uplifting each other instead of moving out and watching people die, instead of leaving people to fall to the wayside. We will teach something different. And so they began what we call today the beginning and the creating of the Chicano movement. And that Chicano movement was created out of this ideology of Chicano, that we are connected, that we are brothers and sisters. The Mexican-American assimilation approach to become what the Americans wanted us had been pushed through the Mexican-American Studies program. But when they finally came to study what they were supposed to be studying, they found out it's not true. We're not the same as other people. They don't accept us. And so some of them had to reject those facts in order to accommodate themselves, to make themselves feel like they were doing something. So they forgot about who they really were and created a new understanding of who they were, even though the society rejected them. Even though they were ignored by the Democrats who they fought for, who they got elected. There was a radical departure that was going to happen at this point. People were going to break away, and there's going to be two schools in our community, and it's still the same way today. There are those who follow the assimilation prospect, that if I just do what white people tell me, act like them, talk like them, read like them, speak like them, dress like them, live like them, I'll be okay. And there's the other side that said, no, they will never accept us for who we are. And why should we have to become like them when we are already us? We are already who we are. We should be proud of who we are. We should stand up for who we are. We should fight for who we are. We should teach our children to be proud of who they are. A radical departure came. And that radical departure was met by different things. I need for you to have in your final exam. Make sure you write this down. I need for you to have this in your final exam. Make sure you write this down. I need for you to write this in your final exam. Make sure you write this down. Crystal City, Texas. What happened there? The entire town was about 85, 86% brown and like 15% white. Yet all the whites were all the fire people, all the police people, all the government people, all the business people, all the school board people. And finally, one day, the Mexicans woke up and they said, we're going to stop it. And they voted all the white people out of office and put all brown people in. Is that good news or bad news for the white population that wants to rule and keep us where we're at? Very bad. Crystal City, Texas needs to be in your final exam if you want to get full credit. Jorge Gonzalez created a movement called the Crusade for Justice, where he took the issues of urban, meaning living in the city, and he fought for the needs of Chicano Latino people who lived in the city, housing, employment, police brutality, etc. Reyes Lopez Tijerina, and you'll read about all these. I just want to go over them. Reyes Lopez Tijerina created what's called La Alianza, It was out in the rural, out of campo, on the countryside, talking about land grant issues and the ability for Latinos to have land because it had all been stolen from them. Students began to create Mayo, Mexican American Youth Organization, UMAS, United Mexican American Students, MASA, Mexican American Student Association, and so on and so forth. Farm workers began to fight. This is a radical departure. People are breaking away from the assimilation, let's all be white American. And they're beginning to fight for different means, different ways. Farm workers under Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta created the United Farm Worker, UFW, right? I've got the flag on my wall right behind me here. Right there. That's right, the eagle. Yo Soy Joaquin, a poem wrote about who we are. Why are we now rising up? It's on page 77. If you go back and read it, you can read it. I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion, caught up in the world of a gringo society, confused by the rules, scorned by attitudes, suppressed by manipulation, and destroyed by a modern society. I have come a long way to nowhere, unwillingly dragged by the monstrous technical industrial giant called progress and Anglo success. In a country that's wiped out all my history, stifled my pride, in a country that's placed the difficult weight of indignity on my age-old broken back. Inferiority is my new load. I look to myself. I reject my mother and my father. I dissolve myself into a melting pot. I disappear in shame. I sometimes sell out my own brothers for my own reclaim of him when my society gives me his token role. And go on and read it. And if you want the whole, you can go online or I can give you a copy. Of course, they walked out of the schools and began to protest. You're going to see all or a lot of this in the videos and in the readings, but I just wanted to make sure that I went over that. Are there any questions today about what we're doing, what we just talked about, and where we're headed? Okay, please remember, you're reading chapters 13 and 14 in the regular book, and then the introduction and chapter 1 in Munoz, which is called Youth Identity Power, aka YIP. There is a quiz on YIP. Remember, take the quiz, just follow the book, but it's a fill-in, and if you spell something wrong, it's going to say you were wrong. So check to make sure you have spelling. And if it still does wrong, but you know you're right, leave it there and I'll take care of it, okay? All right, you got 2 videos to watch and your other assignments. If you need any help, you know where I'm at. If not, it's been wonderful having you in the class. Thank you. I hope that you did learn something. Thank you, Georgina. Appreciate you. And have a great week. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Do remind yourself that next week is not a week of classes. Not. There are no assignments and no classes. However, I will open up the entire module so you'll have 2 weeks to work on it, the vacation week and the week when you come back. So there's no assignments due next week. All these ones from today are due on Sunday, but then that next week is vacation and then you pick up again. But if it were me, I would do some of it next week and some of it the following week. That way it's less, but it'll be open for you to do whatever you like. Okay, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. I see a little chat thing. Oh, thank you. See you. Bye-bye now.